Welcome to the Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, where every death had a life and every life had a story. My name is Jenny Johnson, and this is just a quick intro to the second half of our conversation with Rachel Meyer of Epoch Preservation. If you missed last week's episode, which was episode number 178, Guardians of History Part 1, this is Guardians of History Part 2. In the first episode, we discussed with Rachel how Epoch Preservation came to be. She and her partner, Josh, found an abandoned cemetery. They set to work restoring it and putting it back together. And that blossomed into the business that they have been doing for over a decade now of cemetery preservation. So in this second half of our discussion, we discuss more tips and tricks for things if you yourself are interested in preservation, things that you can do within cemeteries, and how to also learn about the information if it's something you haven't done before but you're interested in learning. We go a little bit into more detail about how to do those things. So please enjoy this conversation, the second half of this conversation, once again with Rachel Meyer of Epoch Preservation. But I am glad to hear you say not every stone needs to be cleaned. Like I like the way some of the older stones look when they're not perfect. And that's just an aesthetic thing. And since I like to photograph them, I'm like, I kind of like when they're not 100% clean and shining, and maybe what they looked like when they were initially installed. Because especially if they're 2 or 3 or 400 years old, I want them to feel like they're 400 years old when I'm looking at them. So,
but a lot of people like that, and we run into that, especially with our older military headstones, that they want that stark bleach white. And unfortunately, several years ago, I think it's when I first really started doing this, maybe about 10 years ago, there was a local cemetery not far from here that they hired somebody, because the people with the historical society, they were not educated. They just had somebody come in and tell them, and this is how they did it. And they didn't know. I mean, they just didn't know. And this person used, the grinding wheel on these marble stones that were probably 100 years old. And they were beautiful. They were sparkly white, but we went down not too long afterwards. And when you could touch a headstone and then your fingers are white from the powder of the sanding, it's like, but what more could you say? I mean, it's like, so that's the thing that I think the education part definitely, but people just want that brand spanking new, perfect, and for, mostly perfectly white headstones. And it's not going to happen.
I mean, this is like a big topic. Just even cleaning gravestones, it might be a little dry, but it's a big topic that I think about a lot, where the actual cleaning of a gravestone is pretty aggressive. Even the way that I do it, it's not, I'm not, Samantha Stevens twitching my nose.
But that'd be so nice if you could,
Wouldn't that be great? Like, I can't do it. I'm trying to do it. I think I just look like I have to sneeze. But there is some brushing and removal and involved. And if you're not going to maintain it, people are going to have to repeatedly scrub it. So I think it's always best to clean a gravestone with a maintenance schedule in mind. That when it starts looking just even the slightest bit green, you're going to go out there with a 1-to-1 solution of water and D2 and just spray it and walk away. So it doesn't need to manually be cleaned. And I think that is the part that people forget, and they just kind of walk away and they're like, I did it. I cleaned the thing. And you're like, you are probably the 10th person to clean that, whether or not you believe it. And there are going to be 10 more behind you unless it's maintained.
Right.
So there should be, if you live close enough to the burying ground you're working in, you should have some, you should at least tell the owners, as a business, that these things do need to be maintained. And
right,
you can tell when they'll need to be maintained. They start looking a little discolored.
The other thing that's something too that some people forget about D2 specifically, and a couple of other products out there, but it is one of those products. unless the headstone, like the headstone that's right behind Diane in that picture, you can see a lot of lichen and stuff on it. But for like a one that's not quite as dirty or quite as has so much growth on it, you can actually just spray the D2 and, like you said, walk away. It works over time. It doesn't work immediately, but over time, it does what it's supposed to do without you having to physically scrub at it necessarily.
Yeah.
And so, and I think because I've seen, again, this is usually on social media, people talking about it, but again, they want the instant results. And D2 is just a product that if you just leave it alone, it's going to do what it needs to do. Go back in a couple of weeks and check the results, and it's going to look pretty good. And it doesn't require a heavy hand. So especially if it's a stone that is not super inundated with, lichen and moss or other growth, you can just spray it and walk away and come back and check on it. And like you said, maintain it, but you don't have to be real heavy handed with it either.
Well, there's the big difference is whether or not the stone you're working on is porous or not.
Right.
So D2 has its limitations. So we have a lot of very fine slate around here where D2 is almost pointless. Like all you can really use to get it off is, water, lots and lots of water, wooden tools and brushes. And I will like ceremoniously spray D2 at the end or whatever, but it's not really doing anything. Right. It's not really even stopping the growth because there are really no pores in the stone. Like everything is kind of on. But with things like marble, you see like a real kapow. Wow, this thing is suddenly white. Or even with schist or sandstone, they have a lot of pores where the rain can get in and work internally to push out the roots and everything. Those can be treated a little bit less hands-on,
right,
than say slate, where you really do have to manually remove all the lichen off of a slate because the rain's just not going to do it. It's not going to,
So I have to ask you. I was writing questions. I was actually prepared for this interview. What have you found to be the most challenging and then also the most rewarding? Which I know that's probably going to be a hard question on both ends.
I think the most rewarding is the effects that being outside and having my hands dirty and feeling grounded by just touching stone. I really feel like stone, not to sound too new agey, it has a very grounding effect on you. The most rewarding thing about getting out there and moving your body and pushing it to its limits and breathing the fresh air is on your mental health. Managing your anxiety and your stress when the whole world sounds so stinking loud and mean and just nitpicky and nasty. Like you get to choose to go into a burying ground and focus on exactly what's in front of you. And you have some control over how it looks. And you get to, I'm wearing nail polish today, which I don't normally get to do, but you leave with the dirt under your nails and, so I would say the biggest reward is actually more of a personal reward for your well-being in a world that's very loud, to be in a place that's very quiet. And probably the biggest challenge, not for me, because I live in a part of the country that really believes in the arts, like really loves the arts and really values their history, is funding. So I can make a career of this because we have funds in nearly every town, if the town or city adopts them, for historic preservation. You just need to file for them. And other parts of the country don't have that. So when I talk to other people, they're like, where are we going to get the money to do this? Because where there's money, there's motivation, right? Like I couldn't do this full time if I didn't get paid to do it. And so I would say the biggest challenge is always going to be funding, because if you don't have the funding, you might start cutting corners with materials. And I think that that's where we end up with people using dubious materials on gravestones. They just don't have the money to buy a $50 a gallon quaternary ammonium solution, or the right mortars, or so they're out there with Comet or whatever thing they can't afford or have around the house. So more funding for the arts.
You could buy granite cleaner in the store. And when I first started doing this, somebody said, well, what about this? And I'm like, oh no, but then you just never know. They're just, sometimes people just come out and do things on their own. So I definitely see my need for more education out on our cemetery stuff, definitely.
But there needs to be more funding, and there needs to be more financial education around preservation too, because I think even where there is funding, a lot of people think that it's not for them, like they can't apply for it because they're just a person. So I think people need to be educated in how to link up with nonprofits who can go for funding on their behalf. Some of it's just financial education. I mean, I want to say, oh, the work is the hardest part. It's not. It's managing the grants and managing.
No, I agree. Oh my gosh, yes. I mean, I'd much rather be out there getting dirt underneath my fingernails and chipping well, I don't wear polish in the summer, but I mean, that's so much easier than literally begging people for money or trying to find that.
I was going to say, or if you're living in an area where that kind of funding is really hard to come by, then who do you start to approach at that point? Whose interest do you garner that has the money that might eventually be willing to fund these projects? And that can be, like you said, it's really hard because you're essentially begging somebody to say, hey, we want to save this cemetery for these reasons. You can have all your list of reasons of why it's important to save that cemetery. But if you can't get the funding for it, and most people don't just have a couple $1 million in their bank accounts to say, I'm going to just do it, because we just don't. So it's trying to find the funding for that. So I agree that that's probably one of the biggest challenge. I think that's the biggest challenge for most cemeteries in general, especially preservation wise, is the funding.
Yeah, and that really is a matter of legislation, like our Community Preservation Act money had to have been fought for at some point. Somebody had to set up that program. And, we have 100 some odd years over some parts of the country. We're so much older here to have figured it out. But some of the newer parts of the country don't have, governmentally aren't set up. And that's where you need to start contacting your senators and your legislators and say, I want to start a bill that forces my state to allot a certain amount of money to not just historic preservation, but to the preservation of cemeteries specifically. Maybe there's a sub area for the preservation of African American cemeteries, for indigenous burying places, places that don't get that amplification that they need. But it starts at the government level, where you have to advocate for bills to set up these sources of funding from the government. And the government funds a lot of nonsense, like a lot of nonsense.
It's true.
And they can fund the respect of our cultural heritage. That shouldn't be controversial, right? Like I think burying grounds are one of the few things that most people rally around. They're, regardless of political beliefs, or they want their loved ones to be respected. So
that's actually one of the few places different people of different political beliefs can come together.
Yeah.
Because the politics is out. It's amazing how we do have one thing in common, and it's that preservation above all else.
Yeah, because we know everybody's going to die and everybody wants a respectful burial. So how do you keep that going? But yes, that's great. So I guess being willing, though, if you're going to start approaching that and approaching your senators and writing those letters and getting a bill passed, again, that's something that will take time, and it's going to take a lot of energy on your part to do that, because you're going to have to keep doing it over and over and over and over and over and over. to get the right person's attention to start getting the movement going. Once you get somebody's attention and then they have the right connections, then you get more and more stuff. But it does take a while to like make that connection sometimes and to get the interest built up. And of course, if you're approaching your government representatives, they've got a lot of people approaching them from all sides saying, we want this and we want this and we want this. And there's a reason I'm not involved in politics that way, because I don't want to have to answer everybody for everything.
Yeah.
To some degree.
I think that we have the people now who are preserving cemeteries. Sure, there was a smattering of people who did it before, but we are very much at the forefront of a preservation movement that didn't really exist in any real way. And so anybody who enters into this field has to be a fighter. Like, this isn't a place to, if you don't have the fight, if you don't, and that stinks that you need it, but if you don't have the personality to speak up and to say, I need this, this is not okay, I'm willing to be unpopular to save a place, or I'm willing to stress myself out. If you don't have that, there are other avenues of historic preservation that are more widely accepted, right? Like, you can stay in the historic house field, you can stay in these places, but cemeteries right now, because of people's sudden interest in ancestry, those working in cemeteries right now are very much pioneers in this field, regardless of the fact that there have been people before us. We are literally at the forefront of a movement to save the graves of our ancestors, you know, as a movement, as a widely accepted, people who get 2 million followers on Instagram movement, you know?
Well, I think a lot of it is you had the smaller heritage societies and the cemetery societies that were they just kept to themselves. They were not very inclusive in who they invited in. And then more times than not, those populations, those members are older people. And once they are no longer involved, then that just sort of, I don't want to use the pun, the society dies. And if there's nobody to pick it up, then that's, the chances of that cemetery surviving are going to be very, very small. And there won't be anybody really to advocate for the preservation and the conservation of that cemetery. So I like the fact that it's getting to be a movement that more people are getting involved in and see the importance. I think that's because so many cemeteries have been lost. And now we can see what has happened because we weren't involved. Let's do something different.
And they're yours.
Happen.
These things that are lost don't belong to someone else. They're yours. A lot of these cemeteries are owned by the public. They're your spaces.
Right.
And as there's more development and there's more building up, there are fewer spaces that are yours, and if you don't protect what's yours, it'll be gone. So there's a point where you have to demand, saying, as a person who's a citizen, pays taxes for your DPW, for this or whatever, please do a better job, or let me do a better job,
or let us find the people who can do this and build it up.
Protect what's free and available to the people who live in our town, as far as exploring history, because nothing else is free. You can't leave the house without spending money anymore.
True.
I also can't go into a cemetery without spending money, but I got those
well, but, and I do think this is where social media has its benefits, and definitely. YouTube and other things, because people have become more aware of these situations like this. And then you get the people in the same area that are realizing, oh, there's this cemetery. I'm thinking of Eastern Cemetery.
Is that a Black cemetery?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mostly Black cemetery. So I'm thinking of that one. There was a documentary about it. But really it just started with one man who was like, what is going on with the cemetery? It was completely overgrown. Then they went back and discovered it had been sorely mismanaged for about 150 years. When they started trying to go through the records, like we had them on the podcast before, but I had seen a little something about it, I think online. And then I watched the documentary, and then I contacted them and I said, hey, can we have you on the podcast to expand on this? Because at that point, the documentary was a couple years old. But I think it's when stuff like that happens, and then more and more people became aware. He was able, going from one individual who's like, I really want to save the cemetery and figure out what we're doing with it. And even still, it has a lot of financial issues. But there's more people now that volunteer to help keep it clean, and they go in and they mow it, and they're cleaning up the weeds, and they're finding the grave. And now people who have loved ones buried there are able to start finding, or sort of finding, where their loved ones are buried, which is something they couldn't do before. And like you said, there's definitely been a blow up in the interest of genealogy for a lot of people when you have websites like Ancestry and some of the other ones that have developed a way for people to go online and start looking. It's the beauty of the digitization of records. It's helped more and more people become aware of this. But, for the genealogists who have been doing it for decades now, where did they start? A lot of cases was in these cemeteries. And so now more and more people are becoming aware. But I also think there's a lot of other things that people have become aware of about cemeteries that nobody thought of before, unless they were in the cemetery a lot. There's people that are interested in the artwork in the cemeteries. Like, that's their favorite part, is to go and see the artwork on these headstones and these statues and all of that. And then there's the genealogists, and there's all of that. And I think, like you said, it's become more of a movement that people are aware that cemeteries are a place that should be saved.
Well, and also it was for the longest time, those who like cemeteries, like going to cemeteries, there was like, there's something wrong with them. And and it wasn't a popular place to go. Or if you were involved in, people, I still have people look at me funny, but
we're spending a lot of time in the cemetery, but
yeah,
that's okay.
Yeah. And then now that there's the heritage tourism is starting to be a thing, and cemetery tourism. I mean, I think that is helping not only introduce people to the idea of visiting the cemeteries, but it's bringing out those who maybe were afraid to let people know how much they love cemeteries, that it's okay. It's like, even when I travel with my friends, they know they're not cemetery people at all, but they know wherever we go, we got to go to the cemetery. Even if they've done this, they've sat in the car and I had to go really, really fast through a cemetery to see everything, because I know they didn't have, they weren't going to stay a half hour, let alone an hour, let alone 2 hours, which is normally what I would have.
That's where I would say, you guys go do your thing. Come get me in a couple hours.
They would have left me. I mean, I would have been.
I love you guys, but you guys go shopping. I'm going to stay in the cemetery. It's fine. It works.
I used to give this lecture called "So You Want to Save a Graveyard," and it was an hour-long lecture I would give. I gave it to the Mass Archaeological Society, and it was like, these are the first things you do to save a cemetery, and they don't cost you anything to do. And so I also did a blog post. So if you go to my blog, not to plug my
show notes,
and you're pretty sure I just have 2 followers on my blog.
So everybody go check out Rachel's blog and go
find my blog, epicpreservation.com, and you scroll down, there's an article called "So You Want to Save a Graveyard." Mm-hmm. The first 10 things to do when you find an abandoned cemetery. And it is simple things like start a Facebook page for it, which now seems like everyone's doing that. But when I started, no one had a Facebook page for the cemetery.
Right. You were like, I think, one of the first preservationists on Instagram that I started following. And
they've exploded in the last couple of years. But for a while, there weren't many actual preservationists on social media. Like, it was a concept that hadn't really hit as that being something that people would want to be interested in seeing happening and watching what's going on.
And I was using it as a manipulation tactic. use
what you got.
Put it on shout. You're not going to know? Well, let's see what the public thinks about that.
Exactly. See I noticed that. So that was really, really, and I love the fact that you were having not resistance when you first started doing this now, and I see all the work that you're doing. It's like, I don't want to say you broke them down, but you broke them down, and that you educated them.
I
And
had to
I love
change
that.
a mentality, and it was hard. Like, so I always think, there are all these Instagrams, all these TikToks, all these, and that didn't exist. And I don't have a big following, but I'm like an OG online conservator. I was one of the only people posting things about how you do things. So it's kind of funny in that way where you introduce something and other people look at what you do and they improve on it and they make it their own, and suddenly it's popular. Have you ever seen that video where somebody's like dancing in a field and people are like, hey, the first person isn't the person who started the movement, it's the second person who said that's a good idea. So I've had a lot of people during this say that's a good idea and align with me, and then before I know it, everyone thinks it's a good idea.
And that's great.
So
I mean,
I'm just a weird girl screaming in a cemetery. Like,
I love
and
it.
now people, don't even question that these are valuable places. I had so much difficulty changing the mentality of our area. Like, I had to take on this decades and decades long mentality of we go to the burying ground and we party and we tip over gravestones and we leave our beer cans there. Like, my first project, somebody died while we were there. Someone was found dead in the back of,
Oh my
who
goodness.
had an addiction issue and was living back there. Like, these are hardcore places where they were so overgrown that you couldn't see what was going on inside of them. And we have an unhoused community. And these are places where the unhoused people were going and overdosing and, in some cases dying.
Right.
And this person that is not like particularly fancy. Grew up in a project. I grew up with a single mom. It's like, no, we're not going to offer these places for people to shoot up and just leave their syringes everywhere. We're not going to disrespect the graves because we're disrespecting ourselves by doing this, and it was very hard. I felt like I had to be, I am an incredibly kind person, but I am not nice. Like, when it comes down to it, when I think something is the best thing for my community, I will say it, and I don't care if I'm unpopular. And I had to do that for years and years and years. But I think in not being nice, but actually caring an awful lot and having a vision, I earned people's respect in the long run. And I feel like their respect is a little bit more valuable than just being popular all the time.
Right.
And that's kind of what I would like to see more on social media. Is I want us to hold ourselves to a higher standard in every way, not just in gravestone conservation. I want us to hold ourselves to a standard on how we communicate with one another. My pages are they're safe places. I make sure to monitor every comment that comes in. I won't let anyone beat up on one another. And we need to just hold ourselves to a higher standard. It doesn't all need to be overstimulating content that is not done to the standards that these burying places deserve.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yes, definitely.
And what's funny is I started this thing, like, I know I'm not the only one, where, I'd be like, oh, what are you cleaning with? What are you doing this? And I recently posted a cleaning video, and every other comment I got was, what's the solution you're spraying on the stone? Like, I'm being monitored now in this way that didn't exist before. And I'm like, it's water. Like,
just good old-fashioned water.
It's
nothing fancy.
It's probably with somebody, wanting you to be spraying something, so then they could come in and be that person to make all the noise, but then it's just water.
But I was the one making the noise originally. So
I mean,
it's kind of funny to see it come full circle.
it's kind of nice to see that people are making the noise now where they weren't
Yeah.
before. And hopefully
And
it
then
will
I go, it's
continue. So,
water. And they realize they can't fight with me over
right.
water.
Right.
So they're like,
Because
they
there's,
don't respond. But
But the thing is, it's putting more and more traffic to that post because they respond, it's creating that traffic, which is going to put your post up, which will people say, oh, she's just using water. We don't need to use anything else. We shouldn't be using
I
anything.
think that if you were to look at who follows my page, you would realize that the people who follow my page are people who hold themselves to incredibly high standards. I don't attract a crowd that's just in it because it's neat. Like I
right.
attract a crowd who's in it because they themselves are very persnickety, like I am,
No, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, that's perfectly okay. Well, we have time for one more question. And that question, I told you I was going to ask you, I told you this at the beginning, but I want to know what your favorite cemetery is, which I know can be hard.
It's not hard. It's whatever one I think needs my love the most at the time. Josh was in Mattapan today. Josh is learning Chinese. He's been learning Chinese and the entirety of winter. I have this Chinese lady in my ear day after day. I've learned almost none myself, but he went down to Mattapan today and found a Chinese cemetery. Mattapan is part of Boston. Found a Chinese cemetery. If you were to go into my Instagram now, it's in the stories, and it's in terrible condition. Like almost everything is on the ground. And so I think right now that's going to be our favorite cemetery. It's whatever cemetery we think needs to be amplified and to say, have you thought about the Chinese community? Have you thought about, because there are certain communities that their graveyards tend to go even more overlooked. And that's not to say that white settler cemeteries don't go overlooked. They absolutely do. But it's almost like the cemeteries that belong to people who are perceived, as not part of the main history group, almost stand no chance. So
or they get forgotten that they were part of that community. I mean, I've come across several cemeteries or sections in cemeteries, like the whole cemetery would be really nice except this one section, and you go to look at it and you're like, why is this one section falling apart so much? And then when you realize it's there's a whole section actually at the Rocky Ford Cemetery here in Colorado. I didn't realize it was there, and I had to look into the history of it later. We were going through the cemetery. There's a whole section of Japanese graves. There was an entire Japanese community there right up until about World War II, and then they got interred. But like people didn't really know that history was there before, that it had been, and that's not even that long ago when you think about it, but it had kind of been forgotten that this community of Japanese farmers had come in and they were the ones farming the land down there. And there's a whole section of graves to them that you just come unexpectedly upon that you're like, oh, we didn't know that was part of the community. But they are, like you said, these people get forgotten and their graves tend to get forgotten first.
Yeah, we automatically think of marginalized people and think Indigenous people, which I have Indigenous blood. And we think of, African American people. We're making some progress with saving the cemeteries of Black people. I mean, I've worked on, a few projects myself where I've saved, a segregated section of a cemetery, but there are people who you really don't think about. I mean, you really don't think about. You don't know they existed to the point where you wouldn't even know to think about them. Like I was working for the Salem Cemetery Department, and I was like, in part of Green Lawn Cemetery, I was like, what are all these names? These names are so unfamiliar to me. Never had a friend with a last name like this. And it was a sea of Armenians. And I was like, I don't know any people who are Armenian. I mean, I just met somebody whose great grandmother was from Armenia the other day, but these are all people who were coming to America to flee that genocide.
Mhm.
And they are people that we never even think of. I mean, we just don't think of them. And I don't know how these groups, like you were saying, the Japanese people in your area, the Chinese people, like a lot of the comments I got today on when I posted my story was, there's a Chinese community in your area. And I was like, Boston has a really flourishing Chinatown,
Mhm.
and they're buried here at Mount Hope. And so people are just, there are people that people genuinely do not even think of.
Mhm.
Like, don't even know to not think of them. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right. So that's what Jenny and I have discussed when in the process of Colorado getting ready for its 150th anniversary of statehood in 2026. And it sounds so silly to say that when the headstone I'm looking at right now is 400 years old. But anyway, and it's like they do want to start including marginalized parts of the population that have been ignored, no doubt. But then when Jenny and I started talking, it's like we had so many immigrants, Italians, Polish, German, Armenian, Czechoslovakian, and if I forgot, somebody tell me, that came here to work in the mines that they they also are forgotten. And that's
Mhm.
just part of our history that people don't
See, and
realize.
I think that's one of the important things about the cemeteries, because you will find those sections of graves or
Yes,
whole cemeteries sometimes
yes.
belonging to a particular group that, like you said, the Armenians, I was just thinking about that because I think we mentioned them when we did our episode on the Great Fire in Salem, because there were a lot of them working in those factories at the time. And they actually, after that fire, a lot of them left the area and ended up going other places because they couldn't find work again after that fire had demolished their jobs essentially. But
Right.
they'd come through Salem because they were coming through the uh what is the House of the Seven Gables known as? It's a I can't think of the term, but where they were helping all of the immigrants that were coming in.
Oh, like a tenement?
Kind of there's another term that they use specifically, and I cannot, it's eluding my brain right now.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it was that same sort of thing. So, because Salem was a port where people were coming into, like the
Yeah.
Armenians,
Mhm.
and then because they couldn't get any more jobs, they ended up moving into other parts of the country. And then they kind of just got forgotten because they weren't there anymore. And the people that were buried there no longer had descendants right there to help care for their graves. And it
Yeah.
just continued on after
Well, I
that.
cleaned a lot of them. Like
Yeah.
I cleaned a lot of them because
Because
I was like, I don't know. I'm from there. Like my family has lived in Salem since Salem became Salem. And
mine
some of my
too.
family, some of my family were tenement dwellers,
Mhm.
living 14 kids to a tiny apartment, lurking in the mills kind of family. And so I know about the Nova Scotians, the Sicilians, all the people who sort of never heard about the Armenians until I was cleaning their
Yeah.
gravestones. And then I made it like, so when I went to go work for the Salem Cemetery Department, they created a job for me to do what I do.
I love
And
that.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
I got to
awesome.
choose what I did. I chose all of my projects. And the first thing I did was repaired anything that seemed like it was not ever spoken about. That didn't necessarily mean the settlers or anything having to do
Right.
with the wish trials. A lot of times that meant this gravestone is in Arabic and it's the only one in this place in Arabic. Why is that? Or who are these people? I don't recognize. What is this last name?
Mhm.
This is very foreign to me. Why are we talking about this? So I went and I took care of the Armenian graves. And that's only because I'm interested. I want to know who these people are. I want to know things I don't already know. And
Right.
nobody told me about the Armenians working in the mills, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
No, you almost need to specialize in history to be
Oh,
told any of these things, you know?
exactly. Because when we went to New York, yeah, I know I keep throwing that in, but when we went to New York and we went through Ellis Island and they have the different topics, I could only get through the topic of because they have a bunch of little signboards, and I don't know, signboards is not even the right word, but I could only get through immigration because there is so much. And I was humbled to my knees because I thought, oh, I think I know so much about history. And I'm looking at this. It's like, I didn't know this. I didn't know this. I didn't know this. I didn't know this. And it was almost like I felt ashamed that I didn't know that. And this is like what you do in finding these obscure or stones that there's a reason. There's a reason they call to you because they needed their story told. So then other people will start doing the same thing, as going to look for these, maybe they're written in foreign language. Maybe that's a name that I have never heard of. So why? Why is this?
Yeah.
Who were they? Who were
Their
they?
ancestors need their story told.
Mhm.
There's a lot of pain in this country that comes along with not, acknowledging people's history and their struggles.
Yep.
Josh was driving into Brooklyn earlier and I was on the phone with him, and it was just such a lovely moment. I'm a bit of a hodgepodge genetically, and one of my great grandparents came here through Ellis Island from Norway, and my father kind of lived in the New York area. I spent a lot of time there, but Josh is from Arizona, and he's only been to New York once before. And he's driving into Brooklyn. I'm on the phone, and I can hear him audibly gasp, and he goes, "I just saw the Statue of Liberty."
Aw.
He said it was so small on the horizon, and now it's gone because it's behind the buildings, but I just saw it. And I said, that is my favorite statue in this world. And it's because of what it represents. It represents a dream that we have, that you can come to this country and you can make anything you want of yourself. You don't need to be the muckety muck. You can come here with nothing. I was just looking at my great grandmother, Anna Homplin's passenger list. She had $25. She was stunning. So she was given this key to the city that was passed down through generations, which I imagine, and I'm making up the story, no one told me who gave her that key, but it was not a key to the city. It was probably the key to her apartment in Brooklyn, or some sailor or something.
Okay.
She was so beautiful. But, that's the America that I believe in. The America I believe in allows people to not have money, but to have spaces like burying grounds to wander into without having to be rich to appreciate their own heritage, and I don't know if you've ever seen the face of someone who just saw the Statue of Liberty for the first time, but it looks a bit like a teenager who just met Taylor Swift.
Oh, I know.
I saw it.
When we went, and it's like we're standing there looking up, everything was so real, for one, because I took so many pictures outside of the windows of Ellis Island that looked over to the Statue of Liberty, and then from the Statue of Liberty to Freedom, where the Freedom Tower is now. And it was, and like my husband too, was like, I can't believe we're standing here at her feet. It is. And I, because we went in on the ferry boats, and we're surrounded by people that speak in every language in the world. I think us, and of course our kids, I swear we're the only ones that I heard anyway that were speaking English. And maybe because I was so hyper vigilant on the languages, and it was like, this must have been what it was like. All these languages,
coming through
world. Yeah. And then docking at Ellis Island, and it was something. I mean, it was, and yeah, that's why she's my Facebook cover right now.
I mean, that's the America I believe in. And when I hear, not to be political, when I hear people not believe in that America, I think, what a shame for you.
Right.
Because that's a beautiful America, right?
Well, interestingly enough, I just read an article the other day. You'll see articles about Americans who've moved to other countries and why they moved to there and what they like about it, what they don't. Well, I don't remember where I saw it, but they chose to do an article on Europeans who had actually moved to America and what brought them here. And that for a lot of them, a big part of why they came here and stayed, some of them came here for education, right? They came here to go to school, go to college or whatever, and then ended up staying because they felt like here was the only place they could be an entrepreneur. That the options that we have in America, they wouldn't have in Europe. Or if you fail in Europe as an entrepreneur, if you fail once, that's it for you. They feel like, and this was their personal thoughts on this. So I'm not speaking for everybody in Europe, but like they just didn't, they felt like if you mess up here, if you fail at a business, but you want to start again, you have an opportunity to do that in this country that you wouldn't necessarily have in some of these other countries. And that was one of the biggest draws for them as Europeans to stay in America. And some of them became American citizens because they, as much as they loved the country they came from, this was how they felt they could contribute to society, was being here, doing what they do. And they didn't feel like it was something they could have done back home. And so, and I really appreciated hearing or reading that from that modern perspective, because we see that historically, right? We see all these immigrants who came from various times, from various countries because of the trouble in their countries, because there was no food and there was no jobs and there was, so they all came here and then worked themselves from the ground up. And maybe they themselves didn't, and we've shared several of these stories, they themselves didn't necessarily become wealthy or whatever, but they created a system so that their children and their grandchildren and their great grandchildren finally had the opportunities that they couldn't have wherever they came from.
Yes.
And I still think yes, our country has its issues. It definitely has its issues, but I still think we have a lot of opportunity for everybody if you're willing to put in the time and the effort and the work to make the opportunity for yourself.
And that's why these burying grounds are so important. And the people in them, to know them is so, I could say so important, but it's, this is why they have to be preserved. History has to be shared of these people and
all the stories.
All the stories. Yes.
Yeah. Someone needs to forge the path, right?
It's a lot of work, but you know what? If somebody does, yes, I love that. That image is forever going to be in my head. Because who still uses a scythe? Yeah. Somebody had to do it. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a fabulous conversation.
I could talk to you for hours. So
totally.
Feel free to call me anytime.
Absolutely. I want to hear if you're taking on that project in Austin, the Chinese cemetery you're talking about. I want to hear more about that in the future. Because
in Boston,
or in Boston, yes.
We're gonna have to make the wheels start turning on that.
Yeah, I want to know more about that because again, those are the cemeteries that people just kind of forget and they just go to the wayside. So when after you guys have dug in and you're working on that, let us know. Although I'm interested in what you're doing in Concord too, because I was there not too long ago. So
Jenny's got to spend a lot of time back east. She goes there pretty often.
I go as much as I can because I love it back there. Maybe one day.
Well, we're working down in Wayland for the next 2 years.
Nice.
Apart from all the other things we do on the North
I was going to say, from all your other stuff.
Yeah. I mean, we almost have like 2 businesses where I'm over here and Josh likes to travel. I want to be at home. I want to be at home and I want to watch Netflix at night and I, want to cook on my oven. I don't want to, so we were almost split in 2 in that way where he's minding this part of the business and I'm minding the stuff close to home. So,
well, we are grateful for everything both of you do for all the cemeteries that you've been able to help, your whole interest with one cemetery and then it just ballooned and you didn't think you'd ever do it again. I think that's fabulous that lasted a whole month and you're like, never mind. That was a lie. I just was tired. I just needed a break. It's fine.
I was hangry.
It happens. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
But, thank you. And we will have your blog, everything linked in our show notes. And please, listeners and viewers on YouTube, if you need more information from Rachel, please reach out to her. As she said, she's more than happy to chat and help you guys. So if you're starting a project, or even if you're already currently on a project, but maybe you're stuck with what to do next in the cemetery that you're working in, Rachel is a fabulous resource, and she will definitely be happy to try and help you out and see what she can do to get you on to the next phase of your project.
Or just start it.
Yeah.
Or just start it. You just have to start.
Or to know when to end it. I'm just kidding.
Right. Like you said, can we, well, I don't know. When it comes to conservation and preservation, does it ever actually end?
No, it doesn't ever end.
It's like
circling back.
Exactly. But hopefully it helps you motivate somebody else to join you and help you do that too, because in the future, we need more people. So young people, everybody who wants to take it on as they age. And so, yeah, we're so grateful to you. And thank you so much for chatting with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. And thanks for having this podcast.
So we thank you for taking the time to join us for this ordinary, extraordinary story. To learn more about the story we shared, please visit our website, theordinaryextraordinarycemetery.com, where you will find the resources we used to research this episode. And if you are watching us on YouTube, make sure to click the like button, the like thumbs up, and to subscribe and leave us a comment, because this all helps move us up in the YouTube algorithm. And also, if you care to donate or buy us a copy, we have a link on our YouTube description, or if you visit our website, the little coffee cup is located at the bottom left-hand corner.
And please don't forget to visit us on social media, where we share all kinds of cemetery photos, quotes, tidbits, and more. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, and on X, formerly Twitter, at OrdExtraSim. If you enjoyed this or any of our episodes, please consider leaving a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or our website. Your positive reviews and enthusiasm for our show help others who love cemeteries and history to discover us and our ordinary, extraordinary stories.
Until we meet again.